Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Sharper Skills in 30 Minutes, Scenario Planning Part 2, brought to you today by the UrbanFootprint Customer Success Team. I'm Andy Federer, and joining me today is Customer Success Manager Nathan Stone. Our Sharper Skills webinars are designed to highlight new features, showcase tips and tricks, and help you make the best use of the UrbanFootprint platform. In this installment of the Sharper Skills webinar series, the UrbanFootprint Customer Success Team will show you some best practices and tips for scenario planning, including themes for getting started, exploring multiple scenario timeframes, quickly iterating on scenarios, and measuring the impacts of change through the analysis modules. Before turning things over to Nathan, I'd like to remind you that you can ask questions using the chat or Q&A feature in Zoom. As this webinar is relatively short, we'll save questions until the end. I'd also like to remind you that our next webinar is scheduled in 2 weeks. Stay tuned for an announcement on that. And finally, before turning things over to Nathan, I'd like to do a bit of promotion for our paired planning program. If you aren't already familiar with it, our paired planning program partners you with our customer success team to accelerate your use of UrbanFootprint on projects. Here's how it works. First, when you have a project that you need some guidance on, just reach out to your customer success manager. We'll find a time to review your objectives and understand your timeline. Next, based on that, we'll develop a success roadmap that provides you with a plan for training you on how to use UrbanFootprint that is tailored to the specific needs your project has. Next, we'll get you up and running, establish checkpoints, and be available to answer any questions you have along the way. This program has been used by a lot of our customers to successfully accelerate the use of UrbanFootprint on your projects. So if you have a project that you'd like to discuss with us, just reach out to your success manager to arrange a call to learn more about how we can support your work. And now I'd like to turn things over to Nathan.
Thanks a lot, Andy. Appreciate the intro there. And just to remind everybody, my name is Nathan Stone, and I'm a customer success manager with UrbanFootprint. Many of you already work with me, and happy to be on the call today with you here. So let's jump in and get started. The agenda for today is our Introduction to Scenario Planning Part 2. And this is going to cover a couple of items that we did not get into as detailed in the last Part 1 series of the series. So you can see here, we're going to talk about planning themes for getting started with scenarios, run into some of the analysis modules and how they interact with those scenarios themselves. And we'll also talk about iterative scenario development. So how you can take plans further and kind of do interactive planning there. And then we'll also talk about multiple timeframes for analysis within scenario planning as well. But before we get to that, I do want to remind you that we do have all of our webinars on demand. So you can actually go to our website and search there in the resources section for all of our on-demand webinars. And you can go actually back and review the Part 1 of the scenario planning webinar, which covered 3 types of plans, how you can implement those in the platform, those being long-range plans with kind of a bigger scope and a longer time frame, specific plans that are down at the neighborhood level, and then also master plans, which get down into individual sites. So definitely take a check of that and see what you can find out there before you get too far into your scenario planning efforts. So we're often asked what some of the items are that you can consider within scenario planning. What are some of those themes that consistently are investigated? So we provided here a list of starting points that you can kind of jump off of in your scenario planning efforts. And so I'm going to walk through these a little bit and give a little bit more context here. So you can see that the first couple of items there talk about growth as infill. So when we talk about infill, we can put these new developments near existing communities or even along underutilized commercial corridors. These are 2 common themes that we see pretty often. We also can take current trends within a community and then project those into the future. So if things were to continue at the current pace, these are the results and the yields that you'll get out of that. We can also take a different path and look at mixed use centers near things like high capacity transportation. So looking at transit lines and how those interconnect with available land to be developed. We can also look at greenfield areas, which are generally on edge development cases or fringe development within a community. So this is on the periphery of the city. We can look at current trends, or we can even model a more dense trend in the future. And then in the rare cases that a community is restructuring or retracting in its population, which is a more not as common instance, but we can support how to reappropriate land use to manage that change as well. So the first thing that I want to bring up is that analysis modules really enhance the ability to understand what those land use changes are creating as far as yields and impact to your community. So this is going to allow you to measure those impacts with a complete suite of analysis modules. And it really produces a comprehensive assessment of not only existing conditions, but also the impacts of projected scenarios. So you can clearly map these. You can even create reports and charts so that you can quickly compare results and then better understand those impacts of planning and policy options. Another thing to keep in mind is that you can apply these across all scenarios. So if you have 3 or 4 different scenarios within the same community, you can apply these analysis modules to each of those and compare and contrast them and really get an understanding of the differences between them. We do want to make a note here of all the different options we have in the analysis modules. So we've got a very much comprehensive set of analysis modules here. So you can see we start with things like water and energy use, and then we move all the way down the scale to things like walk and transit accessibility. You can also model things like what's happening with the transportation and emissions in a community, and even get into things like household cost factors and also risk and resilience, which we know a lot of our communities are dealing with, both from water and fire. We do want to talk a little bit about scenario framing as a big picture item. So when you look at scenario planning and developing that workflow, there's kind of 3 big questions that we have to kind of address when we go through these. And so it's kind of the where, when, and how questions. So the first question is the where. That deals with spatial patterns and themes. So this is referencing that list that I previously showed, where we were talking about where is development happening in our community. So is it happening near existing communities? Is it near transit? Is it on the edge of the city, or are we doing some type of infill or core development? And all of these are going to impact your scenarios differently. The when question is really about timing. So we can model multiple time frames through each scenario, and we can actually phase them in over time. So we could do something like a 1 year and then a 5 to 10 or a 10 to 30 year plan, which will show a phased approach or different approaches based on the length of time you're assessing. And so communities often work in different time perspectives, and they want to see kind of how things build upon itself, or what happens if you take a different direction with different time frames. It does also generally align with scale of the project itself. So, a new development maybe on a smaller parcel up to the long range plans as well. So that's a general theme that we see. And then the last question is how. So land use differences. We're talking here about the pace of growth. So are we in a percentage change that's happening very rapidly? So it's in a high growth phase, or are we talking about a low growth community as of the projections? And then we also need to understand the intensity of change. So is this happening with big leaps in land uses and intensities, or are we doing smaller, more incremental shifts? So all of this is a great framework to understand how to develop your scenarios. In addition to this, you can even further refine your work through analytics assumptions and some of the library settings. So this is something we definitely encourage you all to interact with your customer success manager if you're curious about how you can refine that work, and we can definitely step you through those types of elements that kind of go a little bit deeper. We also want to make you very aware of the idea that you can actually test, iterate, and analyze within the UrbanFootprint platform. So we really are an industry-leading feature set here. We provide scenario feedback very quickly within the platform. So you can actually look at the yields that you're getting off of certain scenarios very, very early in the process. and then plan for alternatives, and then kind of modify those characteristics and assumptions you're making, and see how they're meeting targets or thresholds within your community, and kind of work maybe on more community aligned plans. So if you have a vision or a direction within the community, and you're wanting to kind of move in that direction, you can quickly see how you are or are not moving towards that goal. You can create space for iteration within your scenario plans. So you can quickly spin this up by duplicating the scenario. You can see here with the little graphic that you're shown here, that duplicate button, and that creates a secondary instance of that scenario where you can build upon or change certain land use characteristics after you've already made some changes, and kind of create a duplicate there and take it a little bit further. Also, scale of the impact based on your land use change is important to keep in mind. So if you're trying to reach certain targets, we do want to make known that your project boundary matters towards those thresholds. So as you apply land use changes, the more geometries or parcels that you have, the more change you will have to implement to see larger measurable results. So if you're making small incremental changes on very few parcels in a big project, you're not going to see as big of an impact. You can see here we've got two examples of that. The upper graphic is showing less than 1% change within a community based on just a few changes to land use. And then the bottom example shows a much bigger painting of new land use, which is increasing that impact over 22%. So this is something to keep in mind. Definitely reach out to your customer success manager. We'd be happy to show you how to set up projects and talk about scale of impacts as you move through that. All right, we're going to jump into the platform demo now, and we're going to highlight a couple of scenarios that I've built out in a neighborhood within Louisville, Kentucky here. So you can see that we've got a neighborhood that consists of a decent amount of single family detached. We have some large amenities here, which are parks on the edge of this neighborhood. And you can see we have some major roadways coming through here. We've got a couple of collector level roads, maybe even an arterial here. And we've got some land uses along that corridor that we're going to investigate today. So I'm going to pull up the base canvas really quickly here, which is our existing conditions as of right now. Here you can see that we have along this corridor kind of low intensity strip commercial. So one of the things that we're going to investigate today is what can we do to reinvigorate this corridor and kind of produce some change within this neighborhood. And so you can see here all of those red parcels are the ones we're really going to be working with. All right, so I'm going to turn off the base canvas and I'm going to go into our first potential scenario here. I've titled this A. And again, just to walk through that process to create a scenario, you just click on this down arrow button and hit create scenario there and select that, and it's going to spin up a scenario for you. So here you can see that I have gone in and I've selected parcels that are along this corridor using a buffer tool. And I've painted these a particular type of land use. And in this case, I've gone with Main Street Commercial High. So this is something that's going to be looking at kind of intensifying the uses along this corridor with a little bit more intensity. And it's going to boost both population and employment because it's a mixed use development type. So you can see that I've selected those there, and I've gone in and I've hit the paint button here under building types, and I've just selected that appropriate land use here. And so you'll see that you do get these summary charts very quickly. As soon as you make that paint change, you're going to see that you've got numerical differences happening here. Obviously, this is going to be impacted by the size of your project. Had we made this project citywide, these percent change differences would be smaller. But since we do have a smaller planning boundary, these are quite large increases to, for instance, multifamily number of units. Same thing for employment. We're getting some pretty impressive changes here. Obviously, this is a full build out scenario. That's what it's considering here, that all of those changes are going to be made, which may or may not be the case right away. And so that's something to keep in mind with that phased approach. So we could duplicate this and we could create kind of a half step in between and then a full build out as well. So you can kind of see how it changes over time. And we would just hit that duplicate button and work on those paints. I'm going to jump into scenario B here, which is kind of a different approach. So this is taking this corridor and kind of reinvigorating it with multifamily use with less of an emphasis on employment. So there's going to be less retail space and less commercial space and more multifamily space instead. So in this case, painting along this corridor in urban podium multifamily, we can see that quickly within this chart, we're getting big population increases and we're getting big employment decreases actually because of that difference in that default land use type and how it shows up in the urban environment. So here you can see, we can just scroll through, we can see those quick changes there, and we're comparing and contrasting those. We're going to get into that report mode where you can really see the differences in them very side by side in just a moment here. And so I'm gonna move over to one more scenario here before I show you the report mode. And here you can see that I've taken a blended approach to this scenario. So here in this condition, I've actually selected parcels along this corridor that are greater than a certain size. I think I did a half an acre or larger. Those parcels are being future land use attributed as multifamily podium. And then the remainder of the parcels that are smaller and more granular are being held as it's the Main Street commercial, which is a mixed use and does have multifamily in it as well, but it does skew a little bit more commercial. So here you can see we've got a blended approach. The good thing here is we're getting population increases, but we've really mitigated the impact of the population loss within that urban podium multifamily iteration. So here we can see very quickly, if we wanted to make sure we were maintaining employment figures, this is a good middle ground and a good blended scenario. And so let's go over here to the report mode on the far left here, and we're actually going to queue that up, and we can actually see these in real time here, kind of stacked in a chart. So here you can see population, which is showing the base condition as of today, as well as each individual scenario that we've created. So we can really compare and contrast upon all of these different community metrics and see the differences between them. And it really gives us a very quick insight into kind of iterating on these potential scenarios. So this is a really powerful thing to look at as you're building out your potential scenarios. We're going to jump back in here to the main screen, and I'm just going to show you here one additional example. So I took this Main Street commercial high and urban podium multifamily, which is a blended condition. And maybe this is something that we're looking at for kind of a mid-range timescale. Maybe we want to look at a 30-year vision. So I've just gone in and duplicated that scenario, and then I've created this additional scenario tab here. And what I'm actually going to do with this is I'm actually going to go in and select a block of parcels that I think will receive additional development that's even greater than what we're projecting here 30 years from now. That's something we want to try to achieve. So I'm going to go into building types, and I'm actually going to choose something like a mid-rise mixed use. In this case, I'm going to pull out the card here, and it's going to tell me it's about 10 stories. I think that's a pretty plausible outcome in this particular community. So I'm going to go ahead and go with that one. So I'm going to choose that mid-rise mixed use. And again, just to paint, we just hit this Paint 17 Features button, and you'll see that it updates those parcels to reflect that change here. And then we're going to get an all new summary chart here, which is going to tie back into the reporting mode. And it's going to give us a kind of long-term vision on those numbers and see where we land there. So that's how you would kind of step through those multiple timeframes. You could even, duplicate this again if you needed, or kind of take a scale back, and you can kind of play with those timescales. One thing I do want to point out is we did have a really large parcel here that's around 10 acres that potentially could skew some of our results, just depending on the focus that we're taking within this corridor. If this was a parcel that we wanted to kind of take out and segment, we could certainly do that. We could undo some of those paints or just not paint it to begin with. But I did want to show that if you did paint this 10-acre parcel, just alone by itself, no other parcels from the base condition are painted, you do see you get pretty substantial increases in value. So do keep in mind that the size of the parcel does make an impact for your scenario developments. And you're going to see that the larger the parcel, obviously, the more applications of a standard land use type are going to be made since it's acreage based. So do keep that in mind. So let's talk a little bit about your potential for running analysis modules and what you can receive from that. So over here on the left side of the screen, we do have our analyze mode here. You can see that we have all of these different analysis modules that we previously defined within our slide deck there. And really, it's very easy to run these. You just hit the play button on the icon there. And once it's complete, you'll see a little blue check mark. So I've actually gone in and pre-ran all of these analysis modules for us here. And if I go back to the report mode, you'll see that not only can we see summary statistics for what the community is yielding as far as the changes to land use, but we can even see how that's being impacted on other community components. So here we have energy and water utilization. So these are obviously impacts based on land use changes. We even have things like walk accessibility and transit. So, what is the accessibility to community features within our community as we add people in certain spatial contexts? And again, we've got things related to risk and resilience even. In this particular scenario, it looks like I've done a pretty good job of keeping people out of harm's way. We're not seeing any increases in population within hazard zones, that being flood or fire risk. So good thing there. And of course, you can go in and check out all of these different scenarios, lots of different things that you can compare and contrast in addition to the summary statistics there. So very much appreciate everybody's time today. This is how you can work through kind of duplicating and iterating on your scenario development, seeing the impacts of all of those changes in a very quick fashion. And it really is a quick feedback loop that you can engage to get early intelligence into what your scenarios are yielding. We think this is a really powerful tool, and we'd be happy to take any questions, and certainly reach out to your customer success manager if you're interested in kind of applying this to any of your projects. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Andy.
Well, great. Thank you so much, Nathan, for that insightful presentation. We do have a couple of questions that I'll get to in a minute, but before I do that, I'd like to remind everyone that you can use the chat and Q&A features to give us any questions that you have yet to answer. So first question, can you achieve a threshold population count in a scenario? So if you had like a target, is that something you can work towards? Or how would you do that?
Yes. So we do have the option to work towards achieving a certain target metric. We've actually worked with customers to achieve this outcome in the past. So in short time here that we have left available, I would say just reach out to your customer success manager and we can review that workflow with you and kind of define that further.
Okay, great. I think that's the right approach there. Next question is, looks like it's related to updating the base canvas. And I think the question is asking whether that can be done after you've started doing scenario development.
Yes, actually, you do have the option, obviously, as you're going into these particular parcels and kind of zooming in and making land use changes, occasionally you'll notice a parcel that may be typed something other than what you want it to be. So actually, you do have the option to go back into the base scenario, and under the base canvas, you can actually reclassify. This is going to be independent of the scenario canvases, and you can do this at any time. So you're not locked in once you start working on those scenario canvases. You actually do have the ability to make a base condition change, and really it's pretty easy to do.
Okay, great. Let's see here. Are there Any assumptions or settings that you can change that impact your scenarios?
Yes, there are a couple of things. As was mentioned briefly in the webinar earlier, there's a couple of places where we can access those. Global library settings is one location, and then also the analytics assumptions. So again, these are things that you can modify slightly that will impact a little bit of the yield within the platform on some of those community characteristics and analysis modules. So I would say just reach out to your customer success manager. We can walk you through kind of the highlights of what those are and kind of step through that for you in any project you have.
Great. Next question. Can you export the analysis you're doing within a scenario if you wanted to do some further reporting?
Yes, we have a couple of options for exporting your scenarios. And so this could both be the analytics modules or the actual land use themselves. And so you can do multiple things here. If you're looking for images, you can actually do both PNG and SVG exports of those layers within the platform. So you can actually get those kind of map exports completed. You can also export the charts. So those are the compare and contrast charts between the scenarios, what those yields actually are. You can download that. I think that's a Excel file actually from the report mode. And then the last thing that you could download is a CSV export, and that's coming from the scenario canvas. You can actually go in and pull out those land use types.
Okay. Running up against our time, but I think we have an opportunity to answer one more question maybe. Is it possible to subdivide parcels within a scenario if that's what you're sort of expecting to happen?
Yeah, so sometimes we have developments coming in that are going to divide a parcel, and we have some ideas about what that's going to look like. We do have a feature that we've released called parcel gridding, and we do have resources available that include a Sharper Skills webinar video on that. So you can go to our on-demand video section and actually pull that video and kind of review that process. And it's going to give you lots of details on how you can grid up parcels.
Okay, great. So with that said, I'd like to thank you, Nathan, for the presentation and thank the attendees as well for your time today. Look forward to seeing everyone on our next Sharper Skills webinar. Thank you.